the Coach Cody podcast. This is episode 2 of the relaunch. Thanks for joining in again. Or if you just randomly caught this episode, you might want to go back, listen to the other episode where I do a bit of a reintroduction just because it's been such a long ass time since I had done a podcast. So going to get these out hopefully every Wednesday with a new episode. But this episode, I wanted to discuss anxiety, particularly or specifically my own anxiety, because it has played quite a huge role in my life in the not best way. And when other people talk about their anxiety, it helps me feel less alone. So I wanted to talk about my anxiety and the severity of it, because I feel like sometimes I kind of just sugarcoat it a little bit, and it's easy just to say, oh yeah, I struggle with anxiety, no big deal. Who doesn't, right? Sometimes everyone gets a little worried about things sometimes, but when it comes to like debilitating anxiety, it's kind of a whole new world, and that is definitely the type of anxiety that I have struggled with and currently still do to a certain extent. I've just found better ways of coping and had years of therapy, but I also wanted to talk about it just to show that just because you have anxiety doesn't mean that you are not capable of doing the things that you want to do. And doesn't mean that you can't go after your goals and your dreams, even if at times maybe it's so debilitating right now that you can hardly leave your house. That doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever. So that's why I really specifically wanted to address this. And it's not something that, at least for me, just goes away, at least not yet. I don't know that it ever goes away. I'm anxious right now recording this podcast. So it just shows that, you kind of just find ways to work around it. And maybe that's not so encouraging, but it does get easier because, social anxiety has been, the biggest thing for me. And here I am recording this podcast. I work with people for my job. I have a YouTube channel. So obviously, it hasn't kept me completely from doing the things that I want. It did take a lot of work to get where I am currently, but it's not impossible. So that's the biggest message that I want to send home to you, that if you are someone who struggles with anxiety pretty severely, to the point where, maybe you're too afraid to go to the gym, maybe you're too afraid to pursue your goals because of, the discomfort of anxiety, and it can have physical effects that are really, really uncomfortable. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about, because it's not just in your brain, right? It triggers a whole domino effect of things that happen in your body. And I think that's the part that a lot of people don't understand who don't really struggle with severe anxiety. And so I guess we can just dive in. We can start with the origin of my anxiety. I'm just kidding. I don't even really know the origin of my anxiety, but I will say I was always a pretty shy kid for as long as I can remember. And I don't necessarily know that being shy was anxiety induced from the start. At least I can't really remember. But I do kind of feel like it started with me not really feeling like I fit in, or like I wanted to kind of disappear. So it kind of took a turn when I started to get older and hit puberty, and, around junior high school, where people start to form cliques in school, and, sometimes the friends that you once had don't really want to either be your friend anymore, or they find other people have different interests. And as a trans person, I really started to feel the impacts of being different, and my social anxiety, and how it impacted my how I interacted with other people, and how hard it was. It got exponentially harder because when you already feel kind of different, and you don't feel in line with your body, it can have a pretty a pretty substantial effect. So I would say around middle school, like junior high school, things really, really kind of escalated, and I would start avoiding situations. The only thing that I didn't necessarily feel anxiety with was playing sports. And I think I use sports as a way to express myself, a way to have a voice, because I was so quiet. I say this very often. I was so quiet. I was basically mute, at least around people I didn't feel comfortable with. Put me with my, very close best friend. I usually had like one or two really, really close friends where they knew the true me and I wasn't afraid. I could be myself. And that still is kind of the thing these days. Because, I'm an introvert, But when it came to other people in school that I wasn't comfortable around, classmates, team members, I was pretty quiet. It kind of got progressively worse too as I got older in high school. I don't know if it's just because I became more aware of not fitting in, or I just felt like I was kind of slowly being pushed out of my social circle. But I was so quiet and so socially anxious and so like self-isolating that I was the only senior on the varsity soccer team that was not a captain. Because to be a captain, you have to be a leader. To be a leader, you have to have a voice, and you can't be afraid to use that voice and, lead your teammates. And I think that's really where things went downhill, and I took it to heart because sports were my life. Like I said, I used sports to express myself and have a voice. I didn't have anxiety in performance. I was, always stoked to play and get on the field. I had like pregame jitters, which is normal, but it wasn't debilitating anxiety. So it's interesting. I know a lot of times there's performance anxiety, but as long as I didn't have to speak, I wasn't really anxious. I'm fortunate that, sports came pretty easy to me. And that was the one place I was able to fit in, even if I didn't say anything. So I always made, the sports teams I played. I mean, minus basketball, because when you get to a certain age, you have to be a certain height to be really any good. So I stopped playing basketball my sophomore year of high school. And that was its own little devastating situation because I always thought I was going to be a professional basketball player when I grew up. But turns out when you're 5'3", no one wants you on their team. So you could be the best point guard you could be, but if you're short, it's not ideal. So anyways, I played soccer all 4 years on varsity, 4 years in high school. And it was real. Like, I was aggressive. It was a way for me to express myself and get my energy out. And I didn't feel out of place. And I think that's probably why, I do what I do today, because in a way, bodybuilding is kind of its own performance thing. It's different. Same with bodybuilding, getting up on stage. Of course, it's nerve-wracking, but as long as I don't have to talk, which I did have to talk in my last show, and that was awful. So next time, I think that there's a possibility of winning. Apparently, I should prepare a speech. But if all I have to do is get up there and perform and do the thing I know that I have to do, I'm usually okay. But when it comes to having to interact with people, having to have conversations, it's really hard for me because I am one of those persons who has a really hard time with small talk. Talking about the weather, talking about, I can't even come up with enough things because I hate small talk that much. I want to get into the nitty gritty. I really want to get to know you. Let's just go straight to what's your deepest, darkest secret and trauma? Kind of kidding, but not really. So that's why I really struggle socially sometimes. But with my line of work, luckily, you get to know people pretty quickly, and it's important to connect on kind of a deeper level. We're not just talking about the weather. We're talking about digestion. We're talking about poop and anxiety and, maybe some eating disorder issues mixed in there somewhere. So you get to get on a more personal level pretty quickly. So that is where, my job is more fitting because I do better with that. But if my job was being like a greeter at Walmart, or maybe, I don't know, like courtesy calls or something, it'd be awful. That's why I was really bad with customer service, which leads me to also say I've actually been fired from a job before for being so quiet. I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but so around high school is when it started getting really bad. It got progressively worse even after I graduated, and being quiet leaves room for a lot of assumptions to be made about you, and sometimes you start to believe that. I believed that I wasn't smart. I believed that I didn't really have a personality. A lot of people assumed that I was either stuck up, dumb, didn't have a personality. The list goes on. And, even when you try to be more social and act normal, there's always that person that says, "You're really quiet. Why don't you talk very much?" It's just like, then you feel like your cover's blown and you just shut down completely. So if anyone's ever quiet, don't ask why they're so quiet. It doesn't help. All right. They're probably thinking they're doing great. And, so if you point it out, it doesn't help. So, where are we going from here? Anxiety. Yes. So the crippling, debilitating physical anxiety. So my first job, I worked fast food. I worked at a place called Jim Boy's Tacos. I worked there briefly, just because I was still a senior in high school, and I wasn't going to be able to play soccer if I continued to work there, so I did end up quitting. But that being said, I fought my anxiety. I think I only worked there for about 6 months, but I fought my anxiety there so hard every day. I would come home from work exhausted, have a headache, like all my muscles were tense as hell. And I don't know that I would have made it if I hadn't quit to play soccer, because it was exhausting. Any day I had off, I just didn't want to do anything. I used to skateboard, and I lost interest in skateboarding just because I didn't have the energy to go out and do it, because fighting my anxiety was so exhausting. And from there, so graduation. I still remember my graduation day and how awful it was, because senior year, not only did I feel like I was pushed out of, I wasn't a captain on my soccer team. I was the only one that wasn't. I wasn't a part of any group. I left half days my senior year because I was doing something called ROP, and I was doing it was like basically a class on health careers. So I was working at the hospital half day, but that was its own thing. But it wasn't too bad because I was cleaning, right? I didn't have to talk to patients. The biggest thing is I had to talk to people who were showing me what to do, but mostly I just cleaned surgery rooms and like turned beds over, and so it wasn't a bad gig, but it did isolate me more from my peers because I wasn't around as much. And come graduation day, you had to pair up with a buddy and walk down the aisle with somebody. I didn't have anybody to walk with. I don't even remember who I ended up walking with, but I remember being in pure panic graduation day, looking around for somebody who also didn't have someone to walk with. And from there, it was almost like this domino effect. The more that I saw that I felt different, the more I avoided situations. And to this day, I don't even know how I ended up like getting married and, meeting someone, because I met someone off the internet. But even within that marriage, like I was so afraid to even speak up, and I couldn't get a job. And when I finally did get a job, when I was about 21, I worked at a place called Mr. Pickles. And mind you, this was during, a recession. So this was 2008. I actually was trying really, really hard to get a job. And man, it was rough. Grocery stores weren't hiring. I got one interview for Rayleigh's once, and I was also going to school. So they wanted someone who was like full time, but I was going to school full time as well. So I needed part time. But anyways, I was working for this place called Mr. Pickles, and it's basically like a better Subway. You make sub sandwiches, and I memorized the menu as I was, asked to do very quickly. I got really good at making sandwiches without having to look up the ingredients. But after, I think it was only a couple weeks, 3 tops, after the end of my shift, the manager took me to the side and sat me down and told me that I was a very nice person, but it just wasn't working out because I was not greeting the customers enthusiastically enough or loud enough. And yeah, it was basically just another chip on my shoulder, another kind of like heartache moment of feeling like I was never going to amount to anything because I couldn't get past this anxiety. And it was especially hard because I thought I was putting on a good show. I thought I was finally, pushing through and forcing myself to do things, even though it did not feel natural. But unfortunately, it was still not enough. I skipped this part. I got a job at Kmart before the Mr. Pickles incidents. And I was only there maybe for a few months. And there's one thing. So, as you know, I'm trans. I was born female. All the jobs for females tend to be front and center with customer service. I wanted to stock the shelves. I wanted to be the person who didn't have the customer contact, who worked, in the background with things. But most all the times, if you are a female, they put you in the front. They have you run in the cash register. So despite expressing the position that I wanted to do, to stock shelves, because they mostly severely underestimate you. Like I was used to playing sports. I loved being physically active. I prefer 100% a physical job over a job having to interact with customers. But they don't care. They don't listen, right? They're like, oh, you're a female. We're going to put you on the cash registers interacting with customers because they just assume that that's what you're going to be best at. And granted, I was pretty small, but still small but mighty, right? So they put me where I didn't want to be. I tried so hard to stay in that job and stay sane just because I knew jobs were so hard to come by. But unfortunately, after a few months, I just straight up quit and I never came back because it was I'd get to a point where I couldn't push myself anymore. It comes with anxiety. There's usually a point where you push to the edge and then the anxiety starts to come down, right? It never comes down for me. So I had enough. I reached my breaking point and coming home with the headache, the dread, so much so sometimes I would physically feel nauseous and sick going into work. And I just couldn't do it anymore. That was my most, I feel like shameful moment where having to quit that job, even though there was nothing wrong with the job, it was me. And I'm someone who loves to work hard. So I felt like such a fucking loser. And I felt so awful that I couldn't push myself through that because I'm someone who plays sports. You learn how to push yourself so hard in sports past the point of comfort. But for some reason with anxiety, I just couldn't do it. And I felt like a failure. So I really fell into a depression at that point. I did start going to therapy and that helped a little bit, but it wasn't long until the whole fiasco of meeting my potential or future husband, getting married. I think he must have really liked quiet people, quiet women that were pretty whatever. Because when I think back to who I was as a person, then I remember feeling like I was screaming on the inside and being like, you have no idea who I am. he really didn't. It wasn't his fault. But I couldn't even express to him who I was. And he never saw like the true me that even my best friends in high school did. Or even who like my girlfriend sees now. And I just never felt comfortable with him. Obviously, there's reasons for that. But anyways, getting back to the therapy, it helped a little bit. But, he eventually joined the military. I told this whole story previously. But the anxiety persisted. And it wasn't until... So, like, even when I left to go to culinary school... I almost quit culinary school my first day. I am not even fucking kidding you. Because our teacher that we had for our foundations class was pretty intense. Like pretty close to the types of chefs you would see, in a kitchen where they don't give any fucks. Like if you as so much as breathe wrong, they're going to point it out and you're going to get in trouble for it. So it was a really intense, I forget, I think our classes were like, there was a quarter, so 3-4 months long. It was the longest 3-4 months of my life, but I ended up pushing through because I knew I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't. And one thing that did help throughout that process, help me stay in there, was that I started becoming who I truly was. I guess I started like giving less fucks. I also think it has something to do with starting to let go of religion because, religion has its comforts and its good intentions, but I think it unknowingly kind of taught me that love was conditional because everyone always says that God's love is unconditional. He loves you no matter what, but it's like, he will also send you to hell and for eternity if you do XYZ wrong or if you don't worship him and stuff. So that obviously is not unconditional love. And there's also something that you're taught as a Christian. Just, some more context. If you haven't listened to the last episode, I grew up in a Christian school from pre-K through high school. And my first, experience with the secular world was in college. So there's these principles that are kind of like embedded in you that you're supposed to represent Christ in yourself. And you're supposed to put forth this image to reflect who Christ is, So I think that kind of also contributed to the social anxiety of feeling like I had to present myself a certain way. There was this level of perfection that was almost accepted and taught. And maybe not everyone took it to heart like that, but I'm just a different kind of person and I will take everything to heart. And if you tell me, you give me rules, something I need to do, I will 100% take those rules seriously. Maybe not as much anymore because I've learned and I know a little bit better, but that's just kind of my personality. And so religion really impacted me in a way that maybe it didn't impact others. But for me personally, it had a pretty significant impact, I think, and had to do with a lot of my social anxiety and how I presented myself to other people and, how you feel like God's always watching, God's always, making sure you're doing X, Y, Z, and you're supposed to be a great example for Christ. And so that was a lot of pressure. So it wasn't until I started when I got divorced, I came out of the closet as gay. Obviously, there's more to that. But the more I became my true self, even around strangers, the more I was able to push through the discomfort of the anxiety because I was starting to feel more safe and at home in my own body and my own self. So I was kind of building my foundation that I had never built for myself. And the more I worked on that foundation and feeling safe and aligned in my body, then the easier it was for me to push through. That's not to say that the anxiety disappeared, but it definitely helped me be able to kind of cope and move through the discomfort a little bit better. And it helps the anxiety to kind of, peak and then ease. So that's how I got through culinary school. It was never comfortable, 100% never comfortable. But I did make some friends, and it helped to have friends who knew me from the fucking start. And it was something that I had never experienced before. And it was basically exactly what I needed. Friends outside of religion who didn't even know religion ever. And my world was just as crazy like to them. If I told them my beliefs and how I grew up, I had a friend specifically in culinary school that was my best friend, and she would just look at me like amazed, like, where the fuck did this stuff come from? Like, how did you believe this? And it was my world. I didn't know any different, and I didn't even know how it might have been contributing to my anxiety. But to have someone know me for me and know that, I was attracted to women and that I was, gay. I'm trans, and now I guess I'm a straight trans guy, which is weird. But to be able to be my true self was a super healing thing. And I think there was a lot of, I think because I knew that I had to hide a big piece of myself, I was afraid to really show anyone any side of me. So the more I showed myself and, people accepted me for who I was, the more I was able to overcome the really severe, debilitating anxiety. So fast forward a little bit to when I came out as trans, and then, I started my YouTube channel. I started documenting that. And the more and more comfortable I got in my skin, the more I started to see myself, who I felt on the inside, on the outside, and the more I saw that people were not only just, tolerant of me, but accepted me and maybe even, wanted to get to know me even more, the easier I was able to push through those anxious moments. And fast forward to 9 years later after transition, which I also met my best friend at a coming out group, which I'm going to have her come on here hopefully next week. But she is also now my girlfriend. So, it's a crazy world. So she was holding a coming out group she was facilitating the coming out group. And she was like one of the first people that really accepted me for me, and from the start could see me. And like I said, at least having one person who is like your biggest cheerleader, knows who you are at the core, and, loves you anyways, makes it a lot easier to navigate the world, even if someone doesn't like you, or someone thinks you're weird or awkward. It's almost like it starts to not matter as much, because you still got your person who thinks the sun shines out your asshole. Well, maybe not, but you know what I mean. So essentially I built that foundation that was missing my whole life, with the help of my now girlfriend, but it made all of the difference. So again, fast forward to where we are now. How is my anxiety? It's still a battle. I do still struggle with generalized anxiety. It's not as bad as the social aspect of things. It's still something I'm working on in therapy. And this isn't to be discouraging, but this is just to say that just because you have to work a little harder to push through it, it doesn't mean that things are impossible. Everyone has something that they're struggling with. Unfortunately, anxiety might be something that I struggle with my whole life. Well, it's going to be something I struggle with my whole life. Just knowing that I'm capable of pushing through and, pushing through the discomfort until we hit the peak, and then it starts to come back down. It's a lot more comforting to know that I can get through that. And I just want you to know that you can get through it. And it might be that you need to build that foundation. Find someone who loves you for you no matter what, and sees you, at your core. But it's possible, and it might be rough. I'm rambling now because I just got anxious thinking about where I'm going right now with this story. But yeah, so it's a combination of things. Generalized anxiety, I do struggle with that. It's part of owning your own business. I think you always feel like the sky is falling and you have a lot of responsibility. But with responsibility also comes a little bit more freedom, right? We don't have to work for the man. We're not clocking in and out of places. We get to build our own shit. But the social part of things as well, it's hard for me to realize, how much it has, held me back or had me miss some opportunities. But moving forward, I know that there is more in my control. And I know, looking back, I went from being nearly mute to now running this podcast, running my YouTube channel, working with people. So that was like a total of 9 years. I went from being super quiet to where I am today, running my own business, doing podcasts, all that stuff, to, it's like, so where am I going to be in the next 9 years? Will I be struggling with anxiety still? Probably. But everyone has something they're struggling with, whether they want to admit it or not. And I think the biggest piece is that I no longer, sometimes, but the shame aspect of the anxiety has lifted. And I think this would be something that I was ashamed to even talk about previously, because the internet's this great place where you can kind of create this image of yourself that like everything's fine. You don't struggle with anything. Like, you're just social anxiety. What is that? I could just completely hide it, but what's the point? And I'm not ashamed of it anymore. It's just something that I struggle with. And like I said, we all have something we struggle with. So if you struggle with anxiety, I hope this is helpful. And the biggest thing I will say that was helpful for me, I'm kind of repeating myself here a little bit, but having someone who, accepts you completely for you, building up that foundation, even if you don't have someone like that, it's just like knowing that you are completely fine and enough in yourself. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to answer to anyone besides yourself. And the more you get comfortable with who you are, the easier it's going to be. Also, therapy. So I've had the same therapist now for 11, 12 years. There's probably people like, you've been in therapy for 12 years. I don't think it's working. But that's just how severe my anxiety is and was. And don't get me wrong, I still have a very physical response to social anxiety. If I go to even a concert, which live music is my jam, I love it. I love it so much that I push through my anxiety to get to it. But there is still a physical response: body tenseness, shaking, sweating, headache, exhaustion that follows. And concerts maybe not as bad as, say, like a speaking event. But I will say a speaking event isn't actually as bad as just sitting down at the table with a group of people, with 3 or 4 people that I'm not really comfortable or familiar with. That is the most terrifying thing to me, because it's going to contain some small talk, right? And at least if it's like a speaking gig, I don't have to think too hard about how I'm interacting with other people, because it's just me. So that's probably where this podcast feels a little bit safer. But I do plan to have guests on, so I will interact with some people at some point. But anyways, I just want to give you the evolution of my own anxiety. And I think there's a lot of well-meaning people out there. I know there was a lot of times when I was growing up where people thought it was a phase, or they would tell me oh, I used to be shy too, but not anymore. I grew out of it. And it's harder when people don't understand it. You know, even my own dad, for example, you know, he's the most outgoing person you could possibly ever meet. And so there's lots of moments where he just doesn't understand. Like maybe he'd tell me to call somebody for something or go hang out with somebody. I'm like, yeah, sounds fucking awful. No. So there's a lot of well-meaning folks out there that don't necessarily understand, or they might just be like, you know what, just suck it up and do it. I've told myself that a million times and it doesn't quite work. So it takes a bit of, you know, self-empathy, grace, acknowledging that you are anxious, but then also telling yourself that you're strong as fuck and you'll get through it. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. So that's something you got to keep in mind. But it's definitely harder when you don't have people around you that are accepting or understand it. It can be something that is frustrating because sometimes we do weird shit in order to work around our anxiety, and we might not express that to people. So they'll be like, why the hell did you do that? Or why did you cancel on me? Or, you know, anxiety can definitely be one of those things that causes you to last minute cancel on a social event. I have done that so many times. So like I said, I am not completely done. It is going to be one of those lifelong journeys, but I did want to point out how far I've come just as a way to say, hey, your journey, you know, maybe you're just getting started. Maybe you're halfway there. Maybe you're at the point where I'm at. As long as you are making progress and you're able to look back and see how much you've changed, that's the thing that matters the most, because that means you're moving forward. If I could snap my fingers and get rid of my anxiety and just night and day difference change things, I would. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And I will say I throw my tantrums many times and wish that I wasn't, you know, inflicted with this awful disorder. But I'm a pretty determined person. And I know I'm not going to let it stop me. Even though it's painful and it sucks, I'm not going to let it stop me. So if you can relate, don't let it stop you either. There's always going to be a way around it. There's always going to be a workaround. We may have to do things a little bit differently than the usual, but that's okay. Everyone's allowed to pave their own path and do the things that are more fitting for you. And just remember that your life is your own and you have to do what makes you happy. And it's okay to go at your own pace. Don't let anyone pressure you into changing or pressure you into doing something you're not ready for. You know, unless it's like your therapist and they're giving you a good little solid push, or maybe your coach giving you a good little, you know, love push. That's not good. Not a love push, I guess. But, you know, giving you that push that maybe you need. So there's some tough love that is sometimes needed, or someone to kind of smack you over the head and be like, hey, your anxiety isn't real, dude. Don't let it take over. But just make sure you do give yourself grace along the way. This isn't easy. There will be times where you're exhausted, where your head hurts, where your body is so tense that you just want to crawl out of your skin. But it does get better. So keep pushing. And yeah, anxiety sucks. But it's not going to be something that's going to stop you. So I think I'm going to wrap this episode about anxiety up. I just kind of wanted to give you a true picture of what the struggle has been for me in case you can relate. And like I said, I think I generally gloss over it because I've been ashamed of it for a really long time. But I'm finally at a point where I've come so far that I want to talk about just how hard it has been in order to help other people not feel so alone. So if you struggle with anxiety, let me know. You can shoot me an email. You can DM me on Instagram at at mrcoachcody, or you can email me at coachcodyharmon@gmail.com. If this was helpful, though, definitely give it a share. Give me a review on Apple Podcasts. These are all helpful for the podcast. But yeah, so that is it for this episode. Just know, whatever you're going through, it's not forever. Keep pushing yourself. You deserve to chase your dreams, no matter what's going on in your life. So All right, guys. Thanks so much for listening. Peace out. And I'll talk to you next time.